Please note that this presentation provides legal information only. No legal advice or representation is provided through this video. This presentation is designed to help self-represented litigants learn about the dissolution of marriage process. Hello everyone, I'm going to be going over this how-to presentation on dissolution, or commonly referred to as divorce. I will be covering some subject areas so you can understand, and covering some terms so you can start getting an idea of what you're getting yourself into. Alright, the realities of divorce. It is not going to be fast. It's the same process for everybody. It doesn't matter if you were married for 1 day or 20 years. It's the same process. The minimum time it's going to take is 6 months. With COVID-19 delays, it's probably going to take a little bit longer than that. And keep in mind, there's multiple steps involved. Filing is just the first of many steps. So filing, you've just started. Keep that in mind. Always know what your next step is. So you are in charge of your own case. The court's not going to be giving you reminders and letting you know, hey, you should file this. You have to keep up with your own case and be sure you know what to do next. And it's a good idea to start learning and understanding the paperwork you're filling out, because more likely than not, in the future, you're going to be filling out that same paperwork. So it's a good idea to understand it now. Jurisdiction deals with what state or county you can file in. So the state requirement to file in any state, you have to have lived in that state for the past 6 months. In order to file in a certain county, you have to have lived in that county for the past 3 months. If there's any children involved, you have to file wherever the children live. So let me give examples of both of these. So say if I've been living in California and Los Angeles for the past year, and then the person I'm married to is living in Tampa Bay, Florida for the past year. Either one of us can file in either Los Angeles or in Tampa Bay, because we cover both the 6 months for the state and the 3 months for the county, since we've been living there for a year. So let me give another example, including children. Say if I have children and I'm married to somebody, we're going through a divorce. I live in Los Angeles, California once again, but my children have been living in Sacramento, California. Since the children have not been living in LA with me, the children have been living in Sacramento, I have to file wherever the children live. So in order for me to file for my divorce, I have to file in Sacramento, California, whatever county Sacramento's in. Filing fees. So to file for a divorce, to start the paperwork, is $435 to file with the clerk. For the other party to respond to the divorce is also $435. You can both try what's called a fee waiver to see if the court can waive some of your fees or let you do payments or partial payments, whatever it might be. But you can check out a fee waiver to see and get some of those fees waived. There are different types of divorce processes you can go through. The most common one, the one you're thinking of, is dissolution. That's the divorce exactly how you're thinking of it. There's also legal separation. Legal separation is a little bit different than dissolution in the fact that on paper you are still married. Why would someone want to do this? Still be married on paper, but everything else separate? Some of the reasons are for like religious purposes, or if you're trying to stay on someone's insurance. In order to have insurance from someone else, you have to be legally married to them. So that would be one of the reasons that I can think of. There's also an annulment. So an annulment is kind of like you're saying the marriage should have never happened. There's some kind of false statement or false statements done in order to get you to get married. One of the best examples I can think of for an annulment is if the person you are marrying was already married and they never got divorced. That is a good grounds for an annulment, because you can't be married to two people. Child custody and visitation. So if you don't have children, you can skip the sections. For those of you that do have children, go ahead and listen up. So for custody, there are two types of custody. There is legal custody, which deals with decision-making power for your children. So some examples of that is doctors, schools, what dentists, sports they will be in. All that has to do with decisions. And there's only two types of legal custody you can have. There is sole, which is 100%. That means only one parent will do all the decisions for the children. Or there is joint, where both parents make decisions for the children. The other type of custody is physical custody. That one's kind of straightforward. It's who the children will be with. There is the same as legal custody. There's sole and joint. There's one different one, which is primary physical custody. Primary physical custody is who has the child most of the time. An example of this is, say, if parent 1 has the child Monday through Friday and parent 2 has the child only weekends. The parent 1 who has the child Monday through Friday has the kid most of the time, so they would be the primary physical custody holders, the person who has the kid most of the time. Visitation, there are different types of visitation. You can specify your visitation, a specific schedule you want. These are other forms that you can attach to be very specific. You can look these up on Google, FL341C, FL341D. Simply type these in Google and you can see how specific you can get with the visitation. There's one called reasonable. Be very careful when you're marking reasonable. That means that you and the other party are going to come to some kind of agreement. It's going to be a verbal agreement, because if you mark reasonable on your paperwork, the court cannot enforce reasonable. They don't know what reasonable is. So be sure if you're marking reasonable that you are on extremely good terms with the other party and you do not think visitation will be an issue. Otherwise, you can use specific to be more on the safe side, to make sure you have a very specific schedule so no one can try to change things up. Because with reasonable, it is up for debate what was what. No one's going to know what reasonable visitation schedule you guys had come up with, so the court cannot enforce it. There's also supervised visitation. Supervised visitation is you believe there is a reason that your children should be supervised when the other parent has visitation time. You have to be specific to the court. It can't just be, hey, I want them to be supervised because I don't like them. There has to be a reason for it. Like, hey, the other party has had a substance abuse problem. They've hit my children before. Something, some kind of reason. It can't just be random. Like, I want them to be supervised. And then you can also choose who supervises your children. It could be a friend, relative, or you can hire a professional supervisor. Next is length of marriage. Length of marriage is very important. There are a couple reasons why the length of marriage is important, which I will cover later. But you need to know the date of your marriage. What exact date were you married? The best place to locate this date is on your marriage certificate. So if you have to, you might have to go to the county records and pull out one of these, or maybe it's in your old files. Just try to find out the exact date you were married. It's very important. Same thing for date of separation. It's the exact date you think the marriage ended. Your date can be completely different than the other person's. The date of separation, it's when you think the marriage was over. It could be different for the other party. Once again, they are commonly somewhat different, but we need an exact date. Spousal support. So spousal support, a lot of people refer to it as alimony. So what is it? It's the best way I can explain it is it's like child support. Same thing. There's a monthly fee or a monthly payment that goes to the other party. And it's based on the lifestyle they were used to during the marriage. So how does it work? Like, how long does it last, or what is that? So for a marriage that was less than 10 years, the payments are made monthly for half the duration of the marriage. So here's an example I put here. For a marriage that was 4 years long, there's going to be payments for spousal support for 2 years if they qualify for spousal support. A marriage that was 10 years or more, the spousal support is for life, which means it's until the other person gets remarried or dies. So on the paperwork, these are the options. You can either request spousal support, which means, hey, I want spousal support. You can terminate it saying, hey, I don't want either of us to have spousal support. For marriage 10 years or more, you're going to need a signature from the other party, or there needs to be some kind of court order so the court understands and knows that the other party is terminating a lifetime of support, a possible lifetime of support. And then there's reserve. Reserve means that it's not open, it's not closed, it's therefore in the future. If you decide to open it up, you have that option. Community and separate property. When referring to property, I put this down. Property refers to everything, not just land. Property is referring to bank accounts, watches, cars, savings account, retirements, anything of value. So when you see the word property, think of just things, objects of value, objects of debt, whatever it might be. So remember how earlier I mentioned that date of marriage and date of separation is very important? This is where they come into play. So from the date of marriage to the date of separation, whatever dates these might be, anything that was acquired, whether it be a bank account, savings account, retirements, cars, houses, whatever it might be, is community property from the date of marriage to the date of separation. So that means anything in here is divided 50-50. Separate property refers to anything you had before you got married. When you were single and dating the person you got married to, that is your separate property. So if you had a car prior to getting married, you had maybe a house before you got married, that would be separate property. Um, and same thing for the date of separation. After you separated from them, anything you got after that, say you bought a car after you separated, that would be your separate property. Some exceptions to community property may include gifts, inheritance, and student loans. Sometimes student loans can be a liability of community property, so these might be exceptions. So here are the two most common examples when it comes to dividing community property and how that would work. So the most common things is a car and a house. Not everybody has a car, not everybody has a house, but these are just some of the common examples that I've seen. So for a vehicle, what I did is I went to this website called kellybluebook.com and I looked up this, I think it's a 2012 Ford Explorer. This website told me this car is worth about $4,000. So say if someone had this car in their divorce and they had this $4,000 vehicle, but they still owed about $1,000 because they're still paying it off, this car is actually worth about $3,000. So the way it would work if this was community property is each party would get half. So each party would get $1,500. Let me give another example. Another common example in divorces is a house. Sometimes people buy a house when they get married. So say if the house was worth about $550,000, but they were still paying it off and they owed about $250,000 on this $550,000 house. If you do the math, it comes out to the house being worth about $300,000. So each party would get $150,000. So how does it work? Well, how do you divide a house or a car? The way it works is you guys have to come up with a solution as to how you're going to divide it. Either one person's going to keep the house or one person's going to keep the car, or you're going to sell both and then divide half of whatever you get. So let me give you an example. If someone wants to keep the vehicle and kind of leverage the house as that, they can say, hey, you know what? I want to keep the car and you can keep the house. You can take whatever the car's worth out of my portion of the house that I was going to get. So say if this is part of the same divorce and this person says, I'm keeping the car. So take out $1,500 out of my $150,000 I was going to get from the house because I'm keeping the car. And then this person who's keeping the house, if they're keeping the house, they're going to have to figure out a way to pay out the other person the remainder of their money, whether it to be to trade some of the other assets. Maybe they had a retirement or a savings account, but you guys can figure out how you want to divide property. You can divide it unevenly as well, as long as you're in agreement. If you're in agreement with each other, that makes things easier when it comes to dividing property, because if you're trying to go half on everything, it might be a little bit more difficult to get halves on things like retirements, because those get very technical. Next is service. This might sometimes be the hardest step. That's why I wrote this down here, because it's different for everybody. So for service for a divorce or dissolution, the person has to be personally served, and not by you. It has to be anybody else but yourself and anybody involved in the case. So anyone 18 years and older can serve the person. You can use sheriffs, but the sheriffs do charge you a fee to do this. If you got a fee waiver, remember I mentioned that fee waiver earlier? If your fee waiver was granted, the sheriffs can do this option for free. Otherwise, I believe at the time, I want to say it's $40. But I'm not too sure. I believe it's around $40. You cannot serve someone in another country. If the person is in another country, you're probably going to have to go through a different process. Sometimes that process is called Hague if it applies to the country they live in. So remember, personally served, anybody but yourself, sheriffs can do it. And if it's in another country, you're probably going to go through a different process. People have it mixed up, and there's a misconception with service. The other person does not need to grab it. There's this picture I put here where the person's grabbing it. That doesn't need to happen with service. Service can simply be like, hey, here's your paperwork, and they don't want to grab it, just place it on the floor and walk away. If they don't want to pick up the paperwork, that's 100% on them. Next are the steps of divorce. So this is an outline of how it can possibly go. These are the 3 possible outcomes for divorce. So the very first thing is filing your paperwork. You have the petition, and then you serve the other party. So once you serve the other party, these are the ways that it can go. I put 31 days here because this is for a default. If 31 days go by and the person has not responded, then your process will be a default. You're going to file for default, and then you're going to prepare a default judgment to submit for approval. Keep in mind for default, if the other person is in the military, there's a special rule that does not allow them to be defaulted. So if the other person is in the military, you're probably going to have to go with a stipulated judgment because that person cannot be defaulted after 31 days. It's a special rule. The other way it can go is you serve the person and they respond, but they're in agreement. That means they agree 100% with everything on the divorce. This would be a stipulated judgment. Then you guys just have to prepare a stipulated judgment and then submit it for approval with the judge or with the court. Next is the last one. Hopefully you guys don't have to go through this one, but this is called a contested. That means the person responded, they filed a response, but they do not agree. That means you have to go to court so the judge or the court can resolve whatever issues that you guys don't agree upon. So this one is going to be delayed because trial settings, so that means going to court, have been pushed back because of COVID. So I'm not sure how long it's going to take you to get into court, but it will be a while. So once you guys gone to court and they resolve your issues, keep in mind you still have to prepare that paperwork into judgment form. All right, going to court and resolving the issues, that's not the final step. You have to put whatever happened in court onto judgment paperwork. So these are the three types of judgments you can have. There is a default judgment, which means the person never answered, one person did everything. There's a stipulated judgment, which means you guys were in 100% in agreement. You guys never went to court. And there is a contested judgment, which means you went to court and then you resolve the issues in court and then you prepare that contested judgment. Temporary orders is the last thing I'm going to go over with you guys. So these are orders you can ask for the duration of your case. Remember how I mentioned how COVID has backed up the court and things might take a little bit longer. So while you're waiting, while your case is open, you can get these temporary orders which are good for the duration of your case. As soon as you get your judgment, technically these orders are sometimes no longer valid. Sometimes they can incorporate these temporary orders into your final orders, but these are technically temporary orders for the duration of your case. That means up until you get that judgment. These are commonly referred to as RFOs or requests for orders. And you can ask for pretty much anything you want in your case. Some examples of what you can ask for is for temporary orders for child support, temporary orders for spouse support. Sometimes people are trying to get passports for their children, things like that. You can ask for a court date so you can get the judge's permission or approval or court order to get some orders you're looking for. There's also something called an emergency ex parte. So this means that you need something immediate or some kind of harm or danger to the children. You can look up the exact wording that they have. It's Rule 5.151. You can type that in Google. And it should come up. This is the exact wording that I used in Google, and it gave me the exact rule in the courts to see what qualifies or what's the requirement for an ex parte. So this is to have a court hearing the very next day. That means there's some dire emergency. So some examples that have been for child custody, the other parent might have been in some kind of altercation or domestic violence, and the other parent's trying to get some emergency custody orders to take the child away from that dangerous environment. That's what would be an example of an ex parte, that some of the ex partes that you can do. But to look up the exact language to see if you want to try to go for the emergency, the rule is Rule 5.151, request for temporary emergency ex parte order. Type that in Google and it should come up. And that's it. That's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can call this self-help number. You might possibly get me on the line, and it's free legal information. We don't represent you legally. We don't give legal advice. All we do is provide you with legal information. If you have any questions on when you're filling out paperwork, you can call us. Or if you have any more questions about this presentation, something that I didn't maybe go into much detail and you want a little bit more details on, you can call this number. Anybody who answers that phone should be able to answer that question for you. Also in the description, I'm going to try to put some links to the paperwork if you want to try and get started on that paperwork. And there should be some how-to guides on how to fill out that paperwork. And once again, if you have any more questions, feel free to call this number, 213-235-0060. Good luck, and hopefully this video was helpful. If it was helpful, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. We would appreciate it. All right, thanks everyone.